Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you here to Central Michigan University for our presentation on puberty, sexuality, and behavior. The presentation is brought to you by DB Central, which is funded through the United States Department of Education, Office of Special Education Programs. I don't want to go on and on. I'd like you to turn your attention towards our presenter today, Deanna Peterson. She comes to us from Texas School for the Blind and Visually Impaired and has a great deal of experience that I think you'll find applicable to the work that you do. So enjoy.
All right. Thank you all so much for coming and having interest in this topic. And I apologize for many months ago when I was scheduled to be here and couldn't get here due to weather. We're going to get to know each other really well by the end of the day. So I think we should just go ahead and say some of the words. Everybody say it or sign it with me. Penis! Penis! Come on! Vagina! Masturbate! We have to get really comfortable with these terms if we're going to teach our students and teach our children. So just wanted to say it. A little bit about myself. I work at the Texas School for the Blind and Visually Impaired. I'm the deafblind specialist there. I've been there for 20 years. Started out as a classroom teacher with children with deaf blindness and fell in love and stayed around. Personally, I'm a new single mom. I adopted a baby last year. She's 2. This is my first time away from her, so it's a little rough. I'd like to, I know there's kind of a lot of us. I know we have parents here, we have interveners here, and teachers here. I think those are the only 3 groups we have. Can you raise your hand if you're a parent? Parents. Raise your hand if you're an intervener. Wow. And then if you're a teacher? Any other group that I left out?
Assistant,
Para. Great. Para. Yeah. So you are working with a deafblind student but don't have the label intervener, is that right? Right.
Yeah, just the one-on-one, dealing with the emotional issues that arise during the day.
Great.
Special ed classroom.
Great. I'd also just really briefly like to know how old your child is or your student, and let's just go with that. And I know we're taping, and I hadn't planned for that, but
7, 8 years old.
7, 8,
17,
18, 7, 19,
25, 15,
21. So, okay, we've got the whole range here. That's great, because I bet we have a lot of the same issues that we're dealing with, regardless of the age. Okay, let's get started. All right, the population that I prepared this presentation for is students or kids with some really basic language. They might be using behavior to communicate. They need help interacting with the world and peers. They have a lot of needs in terms of their daily care and assistance that people provide them to get those skills done. This population definitely does not understand the unwritten rules of sexuality and all of the concepts related to that. And we're going to get into the unwritten rules a lot in a little bit. Does this describe most of your kids? Are they a lot higher than that with higher language and more independence, and describes most most of you? Okay, good. Because I have lots of strategies for those older kids too, but I'm glad we're all kind of focused in the same area. Why is it important to address sexuality? This is a really hard topic for a lot of people, no matter if you're talking about kids with disabilities or not. Thinking about teaching sexuality to kids with disabilities gets even more complex. Really affects people's comfort level. It's always been kind of a passion of mine. I love it. You can have some really, a lot of fun if you're comfortable and if you're open to figuring out what the needs are related to sexuality. And for this group, it's not going to be dating, sex, marriage, having babies, but there's still a huge need for all the other concepts related to sexuality. It's a basic human right, and I think a lot of times we get stuck in teacher mode. We're thinking about IEP goals, we're thinking about independence and learning routines and toileting skills and communication skills. And I think it's really important to put ourselves in the shoes of this deafblind child and think, what do I need as a human to be happy and productive? I need social contact. I need to know what my schedule is. I need to have friends. I need to feel I have control. And we can provide all of those things for our students. And really, before they can learn any other concepts, they have to be provided, or kids just aren't in that zone where they feel comfortable enough to take in information. Children with deafblindness are not asexual. A lot of kids, some kids have syndromes that may affect how they go through puberty. It may be delayed, but they're not asexual. You cannot prevent them from going through puberty. You cannot prevent them from discovering their bodies. So if we can think long before they go through puberty, or for some of us, after they've gone through puberty, it's not too late, then we need to do that to help them build habits that make them interesting and inviting to the world around them. These are really simple answers, but really a big one is that you can prevent a lot of unwanted behavior by thinking and planning about what's going to happen in these kids' lives. And it's much easier to build healthy routines than it is to undo unhealthy habits. I don't really care for the word ignorant, but I really do believe this quote. Person who is socially isolated, who's been left socially ignorant, and who is disabled has a much higher likelihood of being a victim. This is also really hard to think about, but I think it's important to touch on that our kids with disabilities who don't have the language skills to report on people who are touching them inappropriately, who are exploiting them. It's just a fact. They're more at risk. I read somewhere that about 11% of all of the kids who have been abused and neglected do have disabilities. These kids tend to be abused more frequently. And they're abused for longer periods of time. So it's really important to teach them what's okay and what's not okay, who they can interact with on a more intimate level, who they can't. For some kids, you can role play and they can learn how to push people away, how to use their voice to get attention. There's lots of ways that we can learn, that we can teach kids to protect themselves. So that's all I'm going to say about that. This book that you got when you walked in, I don't know if anybody has seen this before, but this is a really good tool. Some of my presentation is going to come from this book. It was written by a couple of my friends at the School for the Blind, and it's really explicit and thinking about the process for making a plan, deciding what areas you need to cover, and why. It's really, really a good tool, and I'm just ecstatic that these ladies purchased it for you all. Society, let's flip this. So, I'm going to talk first about all of the issues and the barriers to why we probably haven't addressed topics related to sex ed with our students in the past. And one big area that stands in our way is society's issues related to sexuality and disability. We send a lot of mixed messages to our students and our kids who are already struggling to make sense of what's going on around them. If they have some vision, some hearing, or not, their world is constantly trying to make sense of what's happening. They might get, someone might brush their back on as they walk past them. They might hand them a tactile symbol or a picture and think that's enough explanation about where they're headed. When you put yourself in the shoes of one of your students and you think, or my recommendation is do a simulation, get some goggles, get some earplugs. It's not going to give you the same experience, but you need to try and take the perspective of how hard it is for your student to cope with what's going on around them and to them on a daily basis, let alone understand and anticipate what will happen in the future. So giving mixed messages is a big one, and especially related to this concept. And I'm going to give you some tips and ideas later for how to hopefully give less mixed messages. It's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable for us to, it's definitely not uncomfortable for us to talk about with each other. It's everywhere, you know, what famous person is having sex with what other famous person, whose marriage is breaking up. Ads on TV. I remember when I was a kid, there was a chunk of time in the evening where it was pretty safe for a parent to let their kid watch TV and watch with them. And when I think about what's going to be available to my 1-year-old before she goes to bed at night and throughout the day, it's frightening. It's frightening to walk through the mall and see the clothes that people think are appropriate for a 1-year-old or a 5-year-old or a 7-year-old. There's an underlying theme out there of be sexy, and it's sold to our children, and people have strong feelings about feeling sexy, and I think it gives people a sense of power. So we need to get comfortable talking about it with our students. And our children. We can't assume somebody else is going to do it, which I think a lot of people do. I learned a little bit about sex ed in my church. My mother drove me to the church on a Saturday afternoon, and I thought, what the heck? Why am I going to church? No explanation. Get out of the car, go on in there. And I came back thinking, wow, like, that was really interesting. A little warning would have been nice. The School for the Blind in Texas, there's 16 students with deafblindness, mostly ranging in this category of learning style. A few that have more concepts and language. One of my students struggled with some issues related to clothing a couple of years ago, and some other concepts that I'll explain. But one of them that seemed the most pressing was clothing. She is Hispanic, and in her home and after school, she was allowed to dress in a way that she could not dress at school. Really low-cut shirts, really tight pants, tight to the point that when she bent over, you could see her crack. Spaghetti, even, more subtle things like at school aren't acceptable, spaghetti straps and showing your tummy. And so we talked about it, and we talked about it, and we talked about it with her. And we're a residential school, so the dorm is right there, and she's living there during the school week. And one day she came to school wearing a mesh shirt with nothing under it. And at that point, it became a little bit of an emergency. I scooped her up. I don't know how she got over here with no adult, no staff intervening in the cafeteria for everybody to see. But I scooped her up, took her back to the dorm, and changed the clothes. Talked with mom and dad about it. Natalie had no vision, but she had, since the time she was little, a really strong sense of a need for fashion, a hobby of checking out tactually what other people were wearing. And rather than, I believe in a really proactive model of thinking about behavior, and we'll get into that later too, but I don't believe punishing teaches a child anything about what you want them to do. And in fact, I think it can go the opposite direction and empower a student with little language to use that behavior to get some attention. So I wanted to help Natalie be successful. And my best idea to help her to be successful was to come to work early for a month and wait outside her door and help her to make the right choices. And then later, she was able to, the evening before, with her residential instructors, choose some clothing, and once it was out on the table, there was no turning back. She couldn't go back in later and switch. We sent home all the clothes that weren't appropriate, but it wouldn't have done any good to have big conversations about why she couldn't wear these things at school and why they weren't appropriate, and that we could see through them. I did try all those things. I brought my own clothes to work. I let her feel them, poke her fingers through the holes. But it just wasn't setting in. So I decided the next step was to help her be successful. And it still makes her really mad. But she knows that I can wear what I want at home, and it's just a rule that I have to do this here at school. Another thing that I mentioned that she was doing was checking out what I or other students were wearing tactually. So I might be sitting beside her and up up came her fingers to check out, like, did I have spaghetti straps on? Were they under there? How high did my pants come up? How wide was my bra strap? How low was my shirt? And I know I missed some opportunities to talk about, was it okay for her to check me out? In my own mind, I thought, yeah, I want her to see what I'm wearing, to compare it to what her ideas are about what's okay to wear to school. But on the other hand, was I doing her a disservice by not teaching her who she could do that with? I wouldn't put it past Natalie to meet someone and before wanting any information about who they are, wanting to know what they were wearing and coming up to touch and feel. And she's a 17-year-old girl. She's not, that might be acceptable from a 5-year-old or a 7-year-old, but there comes an age when the things that we have allowed kids to do when they were young will be interpreted in a negative way and worse. Because they look like adults, and people hold them accountable for having the same accountability to all those unwritten rules. I drew that for you. More unwritten societal rules. Most of the time, Natalie's interest in what I was wearing was just a natural curiosity that I want to foster that. I want to foster and empower Natalie to reach out in the world and find answers to the questions that she has. But at the same time, I want her to do it in a way that people can accept. And, going back to how it will be received by people who don't know about deafblindness and how hard it is for our kids to gather information, if people react strongly to being touched, not even in private areas, how are they going to respond to our kids who might want to sniff them or give them a little lick? That's not going to go well for them. Again, maybe as little kids, but not as adults. Okay, I want to stop here for a second and give you just a minute to think about with a small group or by yourself or with a friend. And I'll give you an example of the unwritten rules. I'll give you an example of for men, the men's restroom, using the urinal. I'll bet you've never read in a book or had a teacher and a class on using the urinal in a public restroom. I'm guessing nobody ever stood up and said, don't look at the guy next to you. Don't talk to him, don't touch him. Definitely don't give him a lick or a sniff. Get in there, do your business, and get out. Don't pull your pants down to the ground when you're standing at a urinal. Expose as little of your body as you can. That's an unwritten rule, and there are so many of them that someone should write a book. So I want you to think for a second and write down, if you can think of one or two unwritten rules. And then we'll write them up on the board and use them. How's it going? Has everybody got a couple ideas maybe to share? All right. I'm going to head over here so we can write them down.
I've got a list.
Who has a list? You got a list?
I have a list here.
Well, I don't know if this is professional or not, but I think you have to tell the story of your mother.
Maybe another time.
Okay. You want to start with you guys? You sound like you might have some to share.
One thing that we had said that there's no written rule on a healthy way to masturbate. So when they are excited, what do they do with it?
Right.
Oftentimes they can hurt themselves.
It's true. Yeah. And we as their teachers can't teach them. Do you have another one?
Sure. There's also not a written rule on where they change clothes. So oftentimes they don't just start changing clothes wherever they are.
Yeah. What else?
When a female is on her period, they're never taught, like, sure, we try to teach them to throw it in the proper place, but oftentimes it's not thought of right away to teach them that. So often you have messy bathrooms and stuff everywhere.
Yeah. No one ever taught me that when I was upset and on my period that it wasn't okay to pull that thing out and shoot it at somebody. That's happened to me before. Any others?
Also masturbation locations, so where to masturbate as well.
Yep. Who wants to go next?
With our group of females, there's a girl, when she's done with her sanitary napkin, what she does is when she wraps it up, she wraps it and wraps it and wraps it and wraps it and wraps it, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, so we have to tell her, stop. You fold it, wrap it twice, and then throw it away. You don't have to keep rolling it and rolling it until it becomes a big ball. So
Yeah.
we had to teach that.
Yeah. It's great that you noticed that was a need area for her and did. Nobody ever directly taught me how much toilet paper I could use just to go to the bathroom. Just sort of figured it out, maybe clogged up the toilet a few times in the process of learning, but I could see it. So I knew that it was clogged up and maybe I shouldn't use that much toilet paper. Do you have any others that you wanted to share?
There's one girl who was using the same pad all day long. It's like, no, you need to change that out. So we had to, teach her to go to the bathroom and give her another pad and show her how to keep her supplies in a purse and carry that with her, and so she could be able to change it all day because she would leave that there all day.
Really gross. Yeah, something that has to be directly taught. For most of our kids, if we don't directly intervene, then they have no idea that other people do it a different way. Any others? You're done.
You want to add? Yeah, there's one other one. Yeah, so she explained about the texture, right? So we'll talk about that. Okay, so when we were first preparing to teach our students about the period, we would run it underwater, the pad underwater, and then show with the underwear so they could feel it, right? You don't touch this specific area. right? And so you would know based on their body, we would teach them how to go so far down, right? And so we would actually get it wet, and so that they would have the experience of the texture and the sensation before it actually happened.
Yeah, it's a good idea. I've had this one student, Natalie, who I was talking about earlier. We did some good planning before she got her period. I brought in tons of pads. She tried out wearing them. She chose herself. Sorry, is that all right? She chose herself which one she wanted to use, which one felt the most comfortable to her. All of those things, when you're deafblind and you're operating on a really tactual mode, things like the thickness of the pad, the softness of the pad, how long or short it is, you know, if those sticky things get bunched up in your underwear and get stuck to your pubic hair, you know, those things can cause the pulling it out and flying it across the, you know, the room. If it's uncomfortable, I got to deal with it. And often discomfort causes some really adverse behavior. So I love that you mentioned that. Anybody else? Yeah. Oh, yes, please.
Yeah. So, high school situation. So going from middle school to high school. And so going through the hallway during the transition year, right? So we're, as the intervener, providing them the information what's going on. And there are a group of LGBT, and they're talking, and so you were explaining, you know, they're LGBT, and their face scrunches up if they don't understand. So you explain on LGBT, and they are, you know, shocked by that information. You're like, yeah, well, this is the lifestyle, and you know, so you open up their mind just talking about lifestyles and students that they interact with. So as opposed to just like, you know, okay, they're students, right? But actually exposing them to, you know, what people choose to do with their life is really.
Yeah, and then along with,
You know, it's a. In sex education, they typically don't talk about alternative lifestyles, right? It's just basically body function, and so being able as the intervener to add on to that, you know, it's not fair that they you know, remain ignorant of that information. So to be able to elaborate that on, you know, the school setting is really, really enlightening.
yeah, and this is a big topic that I like to get into, but a whole nother presentation is the role of the intervener. And having those, I like to call them sidebars, where that child is going to get the information that they need that may or may not be appropriate to directly ask someone. If they're really close to them, it might be appropriate. But, you know, for Natalie, for my student, when I was intervening for her, then if someone was coming up, I could see him coming up to want to have a conversation with Natalie, then I was going to tell her, you know, let's have a sidebar. This person is black. This person is wearing spaghetti straps. Their boobs are big. You know, there was information that she had a right to know and wanted to know, but that was not appropriate to ask people, nor would she understand really that it wasn't appropriate. So I wanted her to get into the habit of knowing the kinds of questions she wanted to have answers to, and knowing that she had to ask her intervener. She couldn't ask them. She wanted to know how old they were. You know, she wanted to know if they got their period.
There's a level of trust that you have.
Yes, yes, yes. Any others? No.
Yeah.
Anybody else want to share a few or one? Yeah.
Just wiping your face when you get food on it, when you're eating, not leaving it on your face.
Yep. Yep. If you're, you know, if you remember when you were little and your mom used to wipe you up, you know, and it was drilled in you as a child. But with a lot of our students, that's just done for them. You know, it's done to them, I should say. So that's a good one. So let's say your face should be clean. Anybody else want to share one? I have to do it. I'm sorry. There's an unwritten rule that you shouldn't fart at a funeral. You just shouldn't do it. But probably nobody ever sat you down and told you.
I've actually told that before, right? When I've had students who their fart was very, very invasive, is one way to say it. I would say, you can't do that. You mask it somehow, right? Oh, I've totally had that conversation.
Anybody else? Uh-huh.
Just talking about, we have students sometimes who will talk about issues that they've had in the bathroom with DMs. You know, I mean, maybe they think that it's relatable, but we don't talk about it, you know.
Yeah.
Anything
Yeah.
that's associated with that.
Unless you have a best friend.
Deaf culture is very open with that kind of stuff. Hey, this is what my stool looked like. This is how big it was.
Right. So knowing that, you know.
And to them, it could be. I mean, deaf culture. That's fair game.
Right. So for you guys, you know, you need to think, you know, am I intervening for a kid who is going to spend 0 time in the deaf community, all their time in a hearing community, and which things do translate and which don't, which are okay, they need to know, and which things they should never do. And that's another layer on top of it all. For my 1-year-old, we go to concerts a lot in the park. Not necessarily kids' concerts, but just we like to be outside a lot. And up to now, when it's hot in Texas, you know, up to now, I thought it was fine when, and maybe it will be okay a little longer, but she will strip off her clothes and get down to just a diaper. I can't do that. I don't have that option. You know, I'm hot. Let's get down to the bra and panties. You know, and I'd like to. Nobody ever told me that I shouldn't do that. I learned it by looking around, seeing what other people were doing, and then for those brave few who did want to try those things, seeing how other people reacted to those people and knowing, I don't want that to happen to me. You know, my daughter's, she doesn't have those ideas that, you know, I should think about whether this is a good idea or not. But she's getting to that age when she's not going to be a baby anymore, and I need to start thinking about how are people going to react to her, not explaining that to her, but just helping her make it happen, helping her just build those concepts that we don't ever really need to talk about. You guys, with your students, need to have a whole host of strategies where you do talk about it with your student. You make experience stories. You write it down in some way that makes sense to your student or child before you go out to Dairy Queen. We're gonna put our shoes on. We're gonna put our shirt on. We're gonna put our pants on. They're gonna stay on. We're gonna get in the car. We're gonna go to Dairy Queen with our pants and our shoes and our shirt on, and we're gonna get some ice cream. When we finish, we're gonna go to the bathroom where it's private. We're gonna close the door and be alone together, get in the stall, close it and lock it, and then pull our pants down, not before. Not when we get to the bathroom door do we pull our pants down because we have to go so bad, and then run in there and trip and, you know, whatnot. It really depends on the level of your student, but even with kids who don't have much language, you can present that kind of information. For a student who who might not be able to read a book and see the pictures about what I just described. Maybe you have an experience box where you have objects in there. You might have a pair of underwear, the shoes, the pants, the shirt, the container from the ice cream because you've saved it from the last time you went. You can go through that experience before you have it with any kind of learning media that your child or student uses. You can present it in a way where you don't use any formal language at all. You can act it out. You can reminisce about these things that have happened and think and plan for what will happen on any level your kid is at, and you can write IEP goals for it. You can make sure that you have the time in your schedule to teach those skills that are going to make your student or child able to have friends and be viewed in a positive way by the others around them. Anybody else? All right. Thank you for those. All right, now we're going to talk a little bit about the roadblocks in thinking about teaching sexuality issues to children with deaf blindness. Like I said, just because the majority of our students aren't going to be in sexual relationships, date, have kids, get married, all of those things. The other concepts related to sexuality, you could spend years teaching: modesty, privacy, personal space, touch, especially for our tactual learners, who we touch all the time, and they touch us all the time, and they should, as you know, as their teachers and interveners. That's how they're learning, is by touching us. It's a big area. It's a little bit challenging to think about sometimes. How do I teach my student, my child, that when we go to Dairy Queen, they can't crawl up on the counter to get to the cashier to see is their hair long or short. It's a big area. Okay, so this next slide, make sure it works, yes. I just felt obligated to have a video of a cute animal in the presentation. They're everywhere on Ellen and in my Facebook and whatnot, but I think we can relate this cat to a lot of experiences that probably our students have on a daily basis with things they weren't anticipating, things nobody warned them about, things that don't make sense to them. So, let's see, I don't think we need sound, but okay. Uh-oh. Slow motion. Doesn't look like it's gonna work. I wonder if I pause it for a second. Oh, you missed the best part. Okay, so cats watching those windshield. Have anybody seen this video? Cat, go good. You've seen it. Cats watching that windshield wiper go back and forth, and at the end here, it goes really quickly, and the cat just flies up and backward and off of the car. I think, when we think about what our kids, what our students are feeling on a day-to-day basis, is probably a mixture of anxiety, fear, anticipation, what's going to happen. I think without the tools of calendars, routines, information in a way that they can understand it, they spend so much time just trying to cope. And that's, when you think about your life, if you had to spend 48 hours in a situation where you were just trying to cope with what was going on around you, I couldn't function. I wouldn't be able to function. This is my daughter. I just thought I'd stick her in there for you. Okay. This is another topic that we could have a whole nother presentation on, is the incidental learning. And by that I mean the stuff that nobody ever taught you that you know. Our students who have dual sensory losses, trouble hearing, trouble seeing, or maybe have cognitive disabilities or other disabilities on top of being deafblind, they cannot access all of these valuable unwritten rules. People who do learn, my daughter, she's constantly learning, and I think I read that it is like 75% of what you know, you didn't learn it by reading it, and you didn't learn it by being directly taught. You learned it by observing what happens around you. For our students, it's exactly the opposite. There's a wonderful chart that I cannot show you because it has copyright on it, at the website interveners.org. If you haven't looked there, it's a really valuable website. This chart was put together by someone who works at Utah State University in their intervener program. Everybody knows about Utah State, yeah. So if you can think of a pyramid, and for us as typical learners, at the bottom, more than half, 3/4 or more, the bottom half is all incidental learning, all that stuff that nobody taught us. In the middle, no, way up at the top, another little chunk is secondary learning. That's stuff that someone told us about or we read in a book. And then a little bit at the top is direct interaction, direct hands-on learning. You learn to bake a cake by baking that cake. So for any child who is deafblind, exactly the opposite. At the bottom, that biggest part is hands-on experience. Can't stress enough how much real experience our kids need. They will only learn to bake a cake by baking a cake. They will only learn to change their own pad by doing it with assistance. Everything they know will be learned because someone took the time to think systematically about what are the steps and how can I give this child the opportunity to participate in every one of those steps. So back to the concepts of all the other concepts that we need to teach our kids, with exception to sex, dating, marriage, having kids. And some of them, you know, my student Natalie, she will go beyond these basic concepts, and so I will have to figure out with her family and with her team how to filter which of those things are going to be issues in her life that she needs information about. But for our purposes, thinking about modesty, privacy, touch, personal space. Do you think that there are, do you think your students can learn about those things? No? No, you don't?
I think they can learn about them if they're taught.
Yeah, and they're not going to learn them incidentally, but if you take the time to write out a routine, a script before you go on off-campus trips or before you leave your classroom, and you go over it every time. Is anybody struggling with any of those concepts right now in your classroom with your students? Do they do those things? Do they touch people inappropriately? Do they sit on somebody's lap they shouldn't sit on? Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you do when they do that? How do you react? How do you respond?
Meaning, is somebody sitting on my lap inappropriately?
Would your student do that? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and at sometimes, you know, it's affection. Sometimes it's affectionate, but sometimes during classroom teaching, I'll say, no, this is a time where you need to be sitting down. Look at everybody else. They're not doing the same thing. You need to be sitting.
Does your student have some vision?
Yes.
Yeah. It makes a whole world of difference, you know, when students have some vision and they can observe what's happening around them without touching people. That's a really hard one. I'm glad you bring it up because I'm an affectionate person. I want to hug my students. I really do. I think they need that. But I struggle because my students are not, they're going to struggle even with me teaching them who they can hug and who they can't hug. And then it goes back to putting them at risk. You know, if we have what we call incident reports at our school, a way of documenting all of the daily incidents that happen in any way, whatever the incident is. I'm sure we have a stack of them about kids being taken off campus and hugging strangers or touching strangers, and goes back to putting them at risk. Is it more worth it, in my mind, for me to get to hug them and show them in this physical way that I care about them and I love them, or is it in their best interest that we as a team, everybody who interacts with this child knows that when he starts coming up that we stick our hand out, and that's how that's how we say hello and goodbye. That this child starts to understand young, if possible. If not, as soon as we realize it's an issue, that the only people he can hug are his family. It's a really hard one.
Question.
Being a new mom, I can relate to this because I just thought of this a couple days ago. I pass my kid off to anybody because she's super social. She doesn't mind whatsoever. But being in the front yard yesterday, I just had that. What if she goes and just hugs somebody?
Yeah.
What if she just walks up to them and wants to be friends with them because that's how she is? So
Yeah.
it is super scary, and I am now thinking of my student in that situation too. Like, everyone wants to come up and touch my student, but he doesn't want to be touched.
Right.
Or, you know, he needs to be taught the same kind of thing. Like, you can't just touch anybody.
Right.
Not anyone can touch you.
And why do we think it's okay just because our students are deafblind to touch them without asking permission or without giving warning or letting other people do that? You know, I don't know why it's not out of malice, you know, but we have to change our mindset so that when we think about our deafblind child, our deafblind student, that we see them no differently, on one level, no differently than we see anybody else and their needs as a human. You know, if some stranger came up to you, didn't even touch you, but just looked at you, you know, you might have some reactions, if they didn't stop looking at you, and if they came closer, and if they looked at certain parts of your body without even touching you, you might want to get help. You might get offended and say something to them. You know, those are all things that this child has a right to know aren't okay to people. Yeah, you want to have a comment? Let's take a short break. Oh no, I probably wasn't supposed to say that. We'll take about a 10-minute break and then come back. Let's go there. All right. I'm going to erase what's over there on that board, and we're going to think together, not about our students this time, purely about ourselves, and back when we were a teenager and going through puberty. I want you to think about something awkward, and there should be plenty of things to think about, but if you can think about something that was awkward to you about puberty. And go. And in your little groups, and or by yourself, or whatever you prefer. All right, are we ready to come back together? So I'll start with one example. When I was a teenager, I had cystic acne. I had huge, under the skin, very painful pimples that would only go away if I went to the dermatologist and got a shot in them. They would last for weeks or months. These just big, and most of the time they were totally invisible to the people around me, but man, did they hurt and affect my self-esteem. So that's my awkward moment as a teenager. Cystic acne. Anybody else?
I'll share. Obviously, first period tends to be awkward for a lot of girls. Of course, mine happened at school, and I think I was still in middle school, and maybe 6th grade or something, so I was really young, and nobody else had gotten their period yet. And of course, I didn't know what to do, and should I ask the teacher for something? Should I ask for help? It was very awkward.
First period. I got sent home from school for my first period, and then later all the women in my family were calling and congratulating me. I was like, what? What in the world? Anybody?
That transition between when you notice that your legs are hairy, you need to shave them, but it's that, yeah.
Hairy legs. Can we also add with that one underarms and vagina and penis? We got some pubes going on now. Ready? All right, those are good ones. So probably for the students that we're talking about here, probably few of them have been warned that any of these things are going to happen to them. But for most of these things, we know they will happen. Not to all of our students, but we know they're going to happen. So how would this cystic acne, how could that, do you think, affect your students' behavior? What might they do in response to having huge, painful pimples on their face? Would any of your students react with behavior?
Oh yeah, anytime she's uncomfortable or hurting.
What do you think she would do if she had some cystic acne on her face?
She'd probably keep touching it, looking at it, asking about it.
Yeah.
She might have behaviors because of it.
She might have what?
Behaviors.
She might pick it.
Yeah, or lash out at somebody else because she's not feeling well.
Right? Yep. The pain that she's feeling in her face might cause her to be aggressive to other people, and they might have no idea that she has pimples that are hurting her. What about, that's a good one, getting her first period. Any student, your student.
I think there's times when she's cramping, but she doesn't like to admit anything that she thinks is wrong or bad, so she'll deny any of that.
I have several of those students. Being sick is perceived as being bad. Yep. And then there's the students who, I love this, who people say they have a high pain tolerance. I don't really believe that. I think no one has taught these students to express that they have pain. I mean, that's a hard concept too, because unless you can see it, how do you know it's happening? But I don't really believe in high pain tolerance. I think that's on us, and that we need to do a better job of teaching students that they have some control, and they don't have to be in pain, and that it's right to tell someone. Anybody else have a female student who might respond to the first period in some other way?
Actually, one of our students, when she first got her period, she was acting out and she was really crabby, and I was, what is wrong with her? And then all of a sudden it just clicked because she said, wet. And I was like, fine.
Wow. What a smart girl. I'm wet. I have peed myself. What's happened? You know?
It wasn't pee.
Right.
She was like, I'm wet, and she didn't know what to do. And it's like, oh, let's go to the bathroom.
Well, she has a lot of skills, you know, because I think some of my students might go ahead and pee their pants. Like, it's already wet, you know, I might as well. I feel like I'm wearing a pull-up or something now, so let's go ahead and do it. What do you think your students might do about getting hairy legs? Some of them get hairier legs than others. Anybody, do you think your students might have any kind of a reaction to that? Yeah?
Most of the boys in our class tend to get excited.
They do.
Yeah.
Look at you.
That's true. Look, I have this one hair on my chest now. I'm a man. How about you?
My student would tend to obsess over things she might not understand or just changes. Keep touching it, probably going around and touching everybody else's legs to see if they have that too.
Mm-hmm.
She hasn't noticed that yet. I don't know if she will or not.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't discussed leg hair with her.
Mm-hmm. I like that you said obsess. I think, you know, when I think about my daughter, the things that she's thinking about and talking about, how many times a day, a week, I have to repeat that concept to give her information, to validate what she's thinking about. When I think about my students at the School for the Blind and their daily schedules, that because of their calendar systems, they anticipate, they know on Monday, I'm going to have breakfast. I'm going to have some choice time. I'm going to make a shopping list. I'm going to go in the van. I'm going to have PE, music, lunch. They know their schedules. And for a lot of them, that's the conversation that they want to have over and over and over and over. I think it gives them security. I think it's a topic they feel confident in discussing. I think they do it for a whole host of reasons. So when you think about how many times they're talking about this totally routine thing that happens versus, oh my God, I have pubic hair. What is happening? This is really cool, or something's happening to me that is really bad and I need help. You know, it's to them, you know, it's a big deal. And I mean, I have students who, in response to getting pubic hair, have pulled down their pants repeatedly, wanting to show and talk about it. And do you pull your pants down? Let me see. I think they're all valid reactions. If we had no idea these things could happen to us or would happen to us, we might respond in the same way. Let me see. Am I the only one? Yeah. All right. Where to start? Where to start? It's a little bit daunting to think about how to start the process of figuring out who's going to teach it, what are they going to teach. This book that you're getting, there's a whole chapter on it that I'm not going to go into much detail about, but it outlines talking with your team, because this should be a team a decision, a team. The team should develop the plan. They should put some procedures in place that are going to safeguard this child. Let others know they shouldn't operate under the same code of conduct. Put some things in their behavior plan and strategies about here's how we respond, here's what we're working on, all of that stuff. It's in there, and those are great tools. For me, I've used some of that process in the past, but what I tend to start with is a needs assessment, not a formal document that I pull up from anywhere, but thinking either ahead of time, if we can catch it and we're extremely proactive, or based on the incidents that are happening with a student. It might sit down with the team and say, what do you think Natalie needs to know about sex education, about modesty, about privacy, about personal space, and about touch? And then after we come up with a list, I typically send it home and say, related to these topics, here's kind of what we're thinking Natalie needs to know, Mom and Dad. Could you come up with a list? Could you add to this list? Or could you take things off that you don't want us discussing? And then I would go to my administrator and discuss it. Then you have to figure out how you're going to teach those things. Most schools have some kind of sex ed curriculum. Ironically, at Texas School for the Blind, it's called FLASH. I don't know what the initials stand for. There's tons of them out there. Few are deafblind specific. The one at our school, it's a big book. Probably 3 pages would relate to my students and what they need to know. This book also has in the back tons of resources that are deafblind specific and that aren't, and a little, summary of what kinds of concepts they cover. You're going to have to make a lot of it up yourself based on what your students' needs are and how they take in information. And I can tell you from experience, if you come up with, say your student's not having any behaviors and related to sexuality or anything that could be construed as sexuality, you might start with modesty. It's a great easy place to start. I guarantee you, once you start to think about those kinds of concepts related to your student or child, not just their standard IEP goal, it's going to open up a whole new host of things that you want them to learn, things that will keep them safe and keep them open to having positive relationships with people around them. But I think thinking about a needs assessment and working in a team and working with that family, because every family is going to have very specific ideas what they do or don't want their child learning, and you have to respect that, or you're going to get yourself in trouble with your administrators, and you're just not going to foster the team approach, which these kinds of ideas have to be taught in that way. All right, so I'm going to show you next. We're going to look at this routine that I gave you for showering and dressing for one of my students. This is Omar's showering and dressing routine, and at the School for the Blind, there's always been an expectation, several, that because our students learn in routines, that these are their lesson plans. So it's an expectation that for eating, toileting, grooming, any structured activity, game, one-on-one group activity, everything that happens there, it's an expectation that it's written up in a routine so that anybody, any sub, any of the other professionals who work with this child or young adult can come in and do this activity with the same kind of consistency that they're used to. Talking about routines, a whole nother presentation, but I hope that you guys have been given information about using calendars and routines. I don't believe our students are going to learn nearly as quickly, nearly as much as they could learn if we're not teaching in this way. If they can't anticipate what the next step is, how the flow of this activity is going to go, then they're going to spend too much time worrying about what do you expect of me, and not be open to learning whatever it is you want to teach them. I mean, this activity is designed, yes, to teach Omar to shower and dress independently, but it's also specifically teaching him how to have privacy and modesty. And I realize that you guys are not, you're not teaching probably dressing and showering, but you're certainly teaching toileting skills, and I think this will give you some ideas about how easy it is to modify a routine, to build in some very simple concepts about privacy and modesty. All right. Staff, that's supposed to be greet Omar in the morning by signing hello and their name sign. Give Omar some time to wake up before trying to initiate getting him out of bed. You may offer him a deep pressure shoulder massage or just sit with him for a few minutes. When he seems alert, sign shower, and he'll usually get out of bed. Assist Omar in finding his bedroom door, sign close the door, and model closing the door with Omar using hand under hand technique. And hand under hand technique is another lesson plan that at all times I had written up in my little folder that was hanging over every student's calendar area, all their routines, then information about hand under hand, along with a list of every symbol that child used, whether it's object or tactile symbols, picture of the symbol, picture or description of the meaning, sign used. Also information about behavior strategies, positive behavior support is what we use. So I want people to know these are the things you might see today. Here's how you deal with it. Sign close off private and help him find his laundry basket and robe hanging on a wall hook right next to the door. So we wanted to make it as easy as possible for Omar to be successful. Close the door, there's the hook, that's where we keep our robe. It stays there all the time unless we are wearing it. Help him find his laundry basket and robe hanging on the wall hook. Omar will use the wall to balance, remove his clothes, and place them in the laundry basket and put his robe on. Assist Omar in walking to the shower. Heel trail the wall on his right and use sighted guide with his left hand. I don't want people, I wanted to encourage independence. So the other thing about these routines is clearly there's a lot of steps in all the routines that your students have. I was trying really hard to keep it on one page, but it was really important to me that people did things in the same way and that I gave them as much information as possible so that they didn't disrupt Omar's ability to anticipate what his role is in this routine. When Omar enters the restroom, sign close the door and close the door with Omar using hand under hand technique. Assist Omar in finding the hook where his robe will hang next to the shower. With assistance, Omar will enter the shower, remove his robe, reach out of the shower, and hang it on the hook. At this point, sign shower private. Then, using hand under hand technique, help Omar close the shower curtain, point the shower head away from him, turn it on to the right temperature, and Omar will readjust the shower head independently when the water has warmed. See bathing routine. There's a whole nother routine about helping Omar wash all the body parts, but yet that's a whole nother routine. Then Omar got some time just to be in the shower and just to enjoy a shower. After about 20 minutes in the shower, I should have signed reach in. You may sign shower finished. Help Omar turn the water off. Assist Omar, this is an old routine, clearly typos, to dry off inside the shower. Then help him reach for the pocket of his robe. With assistance, Omar placed a clean pair of underwear in the pocket during his bedroom routine the night before. Whole nother routine, getting ready for the next day. Omar will put on his underwear inside the shower. Then he'll reach for his robe and also put it on while still standing inside the shower. Assist Omar in walking back to his bedroom. He'll trail the wall with his right hand and use sighted guide with his left. Sign close the door and close the door with Omar using hand under hand technique. Sign dressing private. He will find the hook for his robe, then search for his chair and sequence box, which he set up the previous night during his bedtime routine. Omar's able to dress independently and follow the sequence going left to right with little prompting. Omar works relatively slowly, so allow plenty of time to complete this routine. I don't know if that seems like a simple or a complicated routine to you. I think it's both. It took us a long time to sit down and think how we wanted this routine to be set up for Omar, to maximize his independence, to maximize the concepts around teaching modesty and privacy. Omar didn't have a huge bank of vocabulary and concepts at that time, so we wanted to keep those phrases and those actions as limited as possible. So, and use them as often as we could. Close off private, close the door private. I can't remember what I said at this point, but it once it got going, this happened really quickly. I mean, this was a 45-minute routine, and I think for Omar, someone who had no vision and no hearing, to dress, to shower, get up, wake up, shower, and get dressed. I think that's pretty quick. For us, it might not be, but I think it was pretty quick. But like I said, the time it took to sit down and think through this, to try it a few times, to go back, to rewrite it, to change the steps. You know, the laundry basket shouldn't be over there. It should be right here because there's the door, there's the wall hook. He can take his clothes off, put them in there. Then he can search wearing his underwear for the chair and the sequence box and get dressed. It takes a lot of time and thought to build all your routines in this way, but in the long run, it will be a lot easier for all of you and all of the other people who come in to work with this child and this child to function in this world where everything is happening at a rate that is too fast and in bits and pieces that don't make a lot of sense.